Penna, Murdo, Mona, Yena, Yotor Maze, Murko, Mexi, Ares, Penna, and Sella, Do, Mona, Murdo, Doyora. The daughter, Murdo, Doy, some Hakwana Young, Hela, Tamke, Yutter, daughter, in more than to Tenga. Yutter Mazena, Murdo, Doyana, Abba, Dog, Yema, Tamungua. Yes, that was Yutter Mazena, Murdoyana, Tiga, Pin Pumare, Coachek Mare.
Dharma continues to explain, just as silver ore is silver, if it is not clarified and smelted, it cannot be used as such. Which simply means to say that if we came across the ore that contains silver or gold for that matter, even if we would know, if we would recognize the signs that silver or gold is contained in the ore, which appears as ordinary rocks, that in itself is of not much avail. That in itself is of not much use. We first have to process the ore by a way of purifying, clarifying, smelting it, etc., before we actually have extracted the silver or the gold or whatever it is for that matter, before it can be of any use to us.
Hakwana Yang Hako Tongi Canto yes, Yamaru Yataka Good Gone, then Gerona, Satin, Gerona, then Batoba Sina, then he moves a Maria on Nanda Kusana, Nanda Turing.
Then accordingly, just as with the analogy of the silver ore, Rinpoche goes on to explain, simply knowing that your body is essentially the Yidam Mandala in itself is not enough. It has to be truly accomplished through meditation. So simply having been told how our body and its constituent parts, etc., and so forth, the various elements of it are of the nature of various deities of the Yidam Mandala, simply knowing this in itself is of not much benefit. We have to bring about accomplishment of this, true certainty of this, through practice. We have to train ourselves in the various development process meditations of whatever Yidam deity we choose to practice, and through our continuous repeated practice accomplish the fact, bring about certainty about the fact that this is truly so. Only once we have accomplished this through our practice is the knowledge of any use to us. When it comes to the various methods of training oneself in development process meditation, in the course of which we would imagine ourselves in the shape of the Yidam deity, there are several different techniques of how to go about it, four actually altogether. But the easiest to practice, and at the same time also most profound and efficient one, is the method that is known as Instantaneous Recollection. If we were to train ourselves in this way, we would start as with any other practice by way of first placing ourselves under the protection of the sources of refuge, and then in the second step, give rise to the enlightened attitude, or to bodhicitta as it is called. And after we have performed these two initial steps, we would then instantly imagine ourselves to appear in the shape of the Yidam deity. Instantly, lotus and moon or sun disk, whatever, would be appear, and on top of that, we would, on top of such a seed, we ourselves would appear as whatever Yidam deity we have chosen to practice.
Liga Kundu de country, something country, Nino Chalu country, Tela Yagimbu, Tan. Atela, Tan Yagimbulam, Tayo Maru Sana, Tendo, Maramula, Sharkin Louis. Tendo, Shana, Tatela, Jeram. Hanamo Shargamanduna, Yang Jaya, the Tonga last of Tani. Remember Tela Da, Tela Sampini, Tenditina, then he Ramba and the Tiger, Paul Shot or Rada, Gozuka, Yellow Cado Las of Sabu, the Sana, Chagero, or Techana, then the Genata, Tatela, Jerum, the Maru Luna, Maru Solid, Tonga, and the Sun, the Tonga, Tatela, Jerum, Sarah.
Some practitioners, by all means, have difficulties with this kind of practice, imagining themselves as the Yidam deity, imagining their own body to appear in the shape of the Yidam deity. In such cases, one would be well advised to use a representation of the deity, a painting, or whatever one has at one's disposal, a photo of a painting, and look at it long and hard until all the various features of the deity are clearly remembered. Its body color, the attributes, the position the deity sits in, etc., and so forth. And after having done so for a period of time, one would then close one's eyes and see whether or not this picture can be remembered clearly in one's mind, and one examines whether or not one is able to imagine oneself to appear in this shape. If that works, if one can then, as clearly as possible, imagine oneself in the shape of the deity, the picture of which one has looked at for longer periods of time, this is what we call development process meditation, in the course of which one imagines oneself as the deity, the shape of the deity with the corresponding color, attributes, etc., and so forth. If that, for whatever reason, does not work out or does not work clearly, then again look at the representation, look at the picture of the deity, again try to remember, try to habituate yourself to remembering the various features of the deity, and try again. Then eventually, to a greater or lesser extent, you will be able to indeed imagine yourself in that particular shape. So this is what's known with the Tibetan term of Cherim as development process meditation.
Tela Jeram do cheese. I think a good thing is then Jasan out. And then in Patina, Jabu Mutantic, Tom do, Sasa, non Sayo. And Yamna, I have like a good day, Kadot, Jin Chalu Tanti Mus, Tenda, Yola, then Jasan out, drop down, and little longer from.
We might, by all means, have had, for instance, a statue as the representation of the deity, or a statue made of metal or of wood or of clay, painted or not, whatever, and we might be under the impression that we have to imagine ourselves in such a shape as made of solid matter. That would not be the right way to go about it. When we imagine ourselves in the shape of the Yidam deity, we should by all means do so with all the colors and attributes, etc., but we should consider ourselves in the shape of the Yidam deity to be completely translucent, like a rainbow painting, so to speak, which is as if there were any objects behind the Yidam deity as we imagine it, we could, if we looked hard enough, see these objects. So the shape of the Yidam deity is completely transparent, completely translucent. It is made, if we can speak of made here, out of light, out of rainbow light, nothing other than that. So when you imagine yourself as the Yidam deity, imagine yourself in this way. Do not imagine yourself as made of solid matter of any sort whatsoever.
good symbol, and something gone. God goes a good chung, something gone. God goes touring each other, good thing over something. God goes touring each other, and good thing over $10 in jungle song.
So first of all, we are to habituate ourselves to imagining the Yidam deity as translucent, as transparent, not at all made up out of any solid substances whatsoever. Then we can continue our training with the Yidam deity by way of either imagining ourselves as the Yidam or sometimes imagining the Yidam in front of ourselves. When doing so, we would occasionally imagine either ourselves or the Yidam in front as large as a mountain. At other times, we would imagine the Yidam deity as very small. Any type of size will do. Sometimes we can imagine the Yidam deity to be extremely close. Sometimes we can imagine it as being a far distance away. So there are all sorts of different ways in which we would imagine both ourselves as the Yidam as well as the Yidam in front of ourselves. It just should not be done in any particularly fixed or solidified way that would have us grasp onto the shape of the Yidam deity as something truly existent. Now what's the point of imagining ourselves in the shape of a Yidam deity, whichever it is that we might have chosen to practice? The point of such development process meditation, in the course of which we exchange ourselves or the idea of ourselves for that of the shape of the Yidam, is to purify the negative imprints of the three main emotional defilements under the influence of which we have found ourselves since time without beginning. Since beginningless time, we have habituated ourselves to being reborn in a body, and with whatever sort of body it is that we have achieved, that we have been reborn with in our individual lifetimes, we have committed all sorts of negativity. We have killed, we have stolen, we have committed sexual misconduct, you name it, we've done it. So in this way, training ourselves in imagining ourselves in an awakened form as the Yidam deity serves to purify all the negative imprints that we have committed with our physical bodies, and serves to purify the habitual tendency of time and again re-embodying oneself in a physical body. So to imagine yourself in the course of development process meditation in the form of a Yidam deity is predominantly a skillful means to purify the clinging, the grasping onto a physical body with which for the most part we're usually up to no good. So this is one of the main points of such practice.
Chang, and such as Yambajala, Roth, Sondro. He Gala, and Todo Singer, Tontra, so Nipa Leundu, Tangarang, Lula, Bemin, Jacoton, Loma Tembo Jagadoa, T. Luke Muson around Luke Marawa, then I taught Luke.
And let's face it, we are so habituated to having a physical body, we so cling to this idea of having a physical body, that we continue this clinging, this grasping, even into, even into our dreams. Now the microphone's back. I can stop shouting. Even if we find ourselves dreaming at night, we might have a nightmare. We might find ourselves in a thick jungle, pursued by wild animals who want to eat us, and we experience intense fear in that dream. While, of course, in the waking state we would know clearly, without a shred of a doubt, there is no fear to be felt whatsoever, because we are not truly involved in this dream, in this in the activity that takes place in the dream. However, we hold this idea of a body so dear, and we hold it to be so real, that even in our dream state we experience fear for our bodies, or fear of dangers that could possibly harm the body of ours. I forgot to say before that the body that we experience in our dream is, of course, not our physical body, which probably sleeps nicely and cozily and peacefully in its bed, but it is a habitual body. It's nothing but the expression of our clinging, of our grasping, of our habit of having a physical body. And this also finds expression in other states, in other realms. For instance, those who, under the influence of great negativity, have been reborn in the hell realms, undergo untold, seemingly physical sufferings in the hells. There is one particular corner of these hell realms in which beings are being smashed to pieces with huge hammers by the minions of the Lord of Death. Imagine yourself to be laid out on a huge anvil, and the minions of hell with huge hammers just chop you up and smash you to bits, everything falling every which way. And being done with that, we're not simply dead and done for. We're so habituated to having the body that immediately we would reappear in the body, only to be smashed to bits and pieces again and again and again, undergoing such untold suffering for inconceivable periods of time. Also, that body that we experience to have in the hell realms, if we were unfortunately born in these hell realms, it is not a physical body, it is just this habitual body, it is this idea of ours, it's this habit, this grasping and clinging of ours to appear in a physical shape that we could call a body. That's all there is to it. When death is finally upon us, and gradually the various types of consciousness and perception ability have dissolved into each other, when we have drawn our last breath, then for a brief moment there will appear what is known as fundamental clarity, or the basic clear light, which is that very nature of mind in its natural state as it truly is. This is also likened to a mother meeting with her child. This is the fundamental clarity or fundamental clear light that shines up, and if through the practice of Mahamudra, through the practice of Shamatha and Vipassana, we have habituated ourselves during our lifetime to looking at mind nature, we would be able to recognize this fundamental clarity. The fundamental clarity is likened to the mother, whereas our recognition of mind nature that we would ideally have brought about through the course of our practice is likened to the child. So there would be an instantaneous recognition of the two. And if that were the case, well, we would achieve or experience liberation in that moment. Some practitioners who have trained themselves sufficiently in their lifetime, after they have passed away, would then experience this coming together of the fundamental clarity which is likened to the mother with their own understanding of it, which is likened to the child. And they would simply rest in this state. There would nothing else at all, there would be nothing else at all to be done. And some of such practitioners, by all means, they remain like this for several days, some for 3 days, some for 5, some for 7, whatever it might be. For the duration of that period, the sign of this is that the physical body that has died does not deteriorate in any way. There is no bad smell, the body doesn't begin to look bad in any which way, there is no deterioration whatsoever. The body seems to be just at rest, it seems to be asleep. And when eventually then this period of resting in this fundamental clarity is over, then there is nothing other to be done, or there is nothing other to be aspired to. There are no further stages and levels to be traversed. Then one would simply realize Buddhahood in that moment. That would also be called taking the Dharmakaya-Realization as the path. I forgot to say before that a practitioner who has trained himself or herself, for that matter, in their lifetime, and who then experiences this arising of the fundamental clarity or the fundamental clear light, would in this moment have completed whatever else there was left to be completed in the course of their practice, so that there is nothing left to be done but simply experience the awakening of Buddhahood. However, for the majority of practitioners who have not practiced accordingly, that will in all likelihood not be the case. Even though it is the case that for every being that passes away, that fundamental clarity briefly shines up or arises, most of us will in all likelihood miss the moment and then move on into what is commonly known as the intermediate state, or bardo as it is called in Tibetan. And because we have this strong habit of grasping and clinging, of embodying ourselves in a shape, in a body, so to speak, then for the rest of the duration of the intermediate state, immediately a sort of body will appear. We will have the impression of possessing a body. That, of course, is not a physical body. This body is then called the mental body. And we would then eventually go through the various steps and stages of the intermediate state. However, if we have made it our habit to train ourselves in development process meditation, in the shape of whatever Yidam deity we have chosen to practice, then if we have missed the moment of recognizing fundamental clarity for what it is, if that moment then eventually passes, then it will not be the ordinary mental body of the intermediate state in which we experience ourselves to arise, but we will re-arise in the shape of the Yidam deity in that particular form. So if that should be the case, if we should experience ourselves to arise in the intermediate state as the Yidam deity, the shape of the Yidam deity, then potentially we would be a source of refuge for all other beings who at the same time also find themselves in the intermediate state. And those who would be able to recognize us as such, they would take us as their source of protection, as their source of refuge, and we would have the ability to lead all of these beings to a pure Ram and reach or achieve awakening or Buddhahood as a Sambhogakaya form, all together with all of these beings in a pure Buddha field, in a pure Buddha Ram. Such realization, such awakening that could by all means take place in the intermediate state is known as taking the Sambhogakaya-Realization as the path. So in this way it goes without saying that the two methods, those of development as well as perfection process that the Buddha has taught, are immensely profound, immensely efficient. And therefore we would all be well advised to train ourselves in these techniques while still alive. We have seen with the example of how useful such habituation is in the moment after death or in the period after death. Therefore, if we would train ourselves in such meditation, if we would familiarize ourselves with these techniques while alive, we would benefit from such practice immensely. A branch, so to speak, of development process meditation is mantra repetition. It comes together with development process meditation. And as we know, there's a great many different mantras to be repeated, many different mantras which the repetition in which we could train ourselves in. This is because the Buddha has not taught just a single Yidam meditation technique, a single one-fits-all approach, but he has taught many different approaches, many different Yidam deity meditations, many different techniques of how to go about these meditations, and of course, accordingly, each and every one of these Yidam deities comes with its own particular mantra. So that is a branch of the meditation, and we would of course, then eventually choose one of them and train ourselves in these methods.
Then to teach them what it is, I can never tell the Naranga to Gala, Makaho, Dharma, true. They were la, he Kabuche, Gonga, here to soldier. Yet the Dharma Casa, to Gala, Koro Kabu, they was Tony Kabuche, they don't make it to soldier. That is, there was your Tamboda, Yamba Mandala. The two so they call the Tanzania Goni, Senga, never Titana, and Johnny. The Litania Gona, they are more wicked there, but then never die wicked, Jake, never die, Mandrava, go with there, somewhere. Go pass on go with them, two so good, Kanaka, ticket. Tenga sendo number of 20 and Donny, and Chenenda or Gombe. He gets a Yam, Toba, Lasso, Corwick, and not 20 part, got over in Mina. He get Dharma and go with their somewhere.
Depending on what sort of Yidam deity we would have chosen for our practice, we would also imagine different seed syllables in the heart of the deity. For instance, if we were to practice the great compassionate one, Avalokiteshvara or Chenrezig, we would imagine in our heart center a 6-petaled lotus flower, in the very center of which there would be a white free syllable surrounded by the syllables of the mantra of Avalokiteshvara. Or if we would practice white Tara, we would imagine an 8-spoke wheel, in the center of which there would be a white tam syllable, on the spokes of which then there would be the syllables of the mantra, etc., and so forth. So this will be somewhat different from Yidam deity to Yidam deity. No matter which it is that we have chosen, before we would begin with the verbal repetition of mantras, we would first concentrate to the point of exclusion of every other mental activity upon these seed syllables and the mantra garlands in our heart. This is a particular aspect of mantra repetition, in the course of which we do not yet verbally repeat anything or recite anything for that matter. And this particular aspect of mantra repetition is called cessation repetition. It's called cessation repetition because we repeat the concentration upon the seed syllable and the mantra garland again and again, and cessation because we do so in an ideal case scenario to the point of all other mental activity ceasing, so that our focus, our concentration upon the seed syllable and the mantra garland would be complete. This would be, this can also be likened to be another form of shinen or shamatha meditation, in the course of which we would concentrate ourselves upon a particular object to the point of all other mental activity ceasing. So cessation repetition is in this way one aspect of mantra repetition. The next or second aspect of mantra repetition is commonly known as Vajra repetition. And again, as before, there is nothing verbally repeated or recited. You still keep completely quiet and concentrate upon other things. In the course of Vajra repetition, you concentrate upon the natural flow of your breath. As you inhale, you would imagine the breath that you inhale to be of the nature of Om. Before you exhale, you hold the breath for a short period of time. At that time, it would be considered to be of the nature of Ah. And when you exhale again, naturally, the exhaled breath would be considered to be of the nature of Hum. In the course of this Vajra repetition and the repetition of this natural breathing, there is no verbal recitation of these syllables. It's not as if you sit down or sit there and go om all the time. You just consider the breath to be of the individual nature of either of these three syllables in its three particular states. So again, during cessation repetition as well as Vajra repetition, there is no verbal speaking, uttering of the mantra of whichever deity you practice entailed yet. As the third aspect of mantra repetition follows what is called the repetition of radiating and absorbing, or radiation and absorption. In the course of this, you would imagine how from the seed symbol in your heart as well as the mantra garland, no matter what it might be, light radiates. For the most part, you would imagine 5-colored rainbow light. You would first imagine it to suffuse, to pervade the pure realms of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, pleasing them with praises and offerings, and you would imagine how they, pleased in this way, send back their blessing and inspiration in the shape of similar such light, which then dissolves back into your heart center and the seed syllable and the mantra garland, so being reabsorbed. You would then imagine how light again radiates, this time pervading the 6 realms of the 6 types of beings, purifying them, alleviating their suffering, eradicating the causes all of their suffering, and you would imagine them to themselves transform into the shape of the same Yidam deity as which you imagine yourself. And the light would then be reabsorbed into your heart. You would then imagine how all of these beings who themselves now have taken on the shape of your Yidam deity would together with you repeat the mantra. This third aspect of mantra repetition is the one where you actually repeat the mantra, where you actually verbally speak the mantra again and again. When it comes to mantra repetition, it is up to each and every practitioner, for him and herself, for how long a duration of time they train themselves in mantra repetition. repetition, or when it comes to the number of mantras counted in an individual session. It's completely up to yourselves, and of course it depends on how much time you have at your disposal for how long you do such practices, you repeat those practices during your meditation session. What is rather more important than quantity is the quality. Therefore, it should be said quite clearly that no matter how long or how short a time you have at your disposal, the mantra itself should be repeated as clearly, as correctly as possible. You should not, in the endeavor to go quick, in the hope to go quick and to accumulate a certain number of mantras quickly, cut corners and forget individual syllables or speak them in an unclear way, because in that way the blessing and inspiration of the mantra will not fully come about. Like so many Tibetans, as Rinpoche says, for instance, do, and certainly also Westerners, when the mantra is Om Mani Padme Hum, you should go Om Mani Padme Hum, you should go Mani Mani like that. There is no blessing in that. You would forget half of the mantra, you would not properly pronounce half of the mantra, and of course the blessing and inspiration that is derived through repeated mantra repetition will not come about. Or if you're busy accumulating certain numbers, like some people pride themselves of having repeated 10,000 mantras very quickly, as we have also seen so often with Tibetan people, but also Westerners for that matter, when they go like really fast on their malas. There's no way you can repeat the mantra clearly going like that, and they also have their prayer wheels. Everything gets completely mixed up, and they might be addressed by someone from the side, and they go on at the same time while having a talk about the weather yesterday or last night's food. It goes without saying that there is not much blessing and inspiration in that. So mantra repetition, when practiced properly, concentratedly, has to be done clearly. It can be done fast by all means, but you have to make sure that the mantra is repeated clearly, that syllables are not forgotten, that syllables are not being mispronounced. For instance, if you use your mala to count the mantra, as we all know, a mala has 108 beads, but as we count through the individual malas one after the other, we only count 100, not 108. The 8 extra beads on the mantra, on the mala, are there to make up for whatever faults may have crept into our mantra repetition, even though we try to repeat the mantra properly. We might have, here and there, we might have forgotten a syllable or mispronounced, or our minds may have been wandering off, not been concentrated on the business at hand. So this is what these extra 8 syllables are there for. So, to get back to the beginning, it's the quality that makes the difference, not the quantity. So rather be concentrated, do it properly, then try to do it real quick and be done with For the most part, when we bring such a practice session to its conclusion, we would then, after the mantra repetition has been finished, dissolve the entire visualization as a symbolic means of our intention to liberate all beings, to establish them in the state of Buddhahood. We would now imagine how the entire outer world, which heretofore we have imagined to have transformed into the pure realm of the deity, as well as all the beings that inhabit this world, which we have imagined to have also transformed into the same shape as which we imagine ourselves. We would imagine all of that to dissolve into light and to melt into ourselves. We would then proceed to imagine how we ourselves, in the shape of the Yidam deity, dissolve into light and melt into the seed syllable in the heart, which then proceeds to also dissolve, for the most part from the bottom on upwards, into the empty state. And once the entire visualization has thus been completely dissolved, we would for a while, depending on how much time we have at our disposal, simply rest in this natural state, simply rest in mind nature as such. That would be the point at which we would train ourselves either in shamatha or vipassana, shina or lakto meditation, before we then finally fully conclude the practice. At this particular point now, let us practice a little bit of shamatha meditation. Today, the particular type during which we concentrate upon our breath.
Give us a little more now.
Let us now conclude with the dedication of our